I'm just glad that it was one of the typical newsbreakers who got the George Kittle contract extension. The Bussin' with the Boys podcast, which is hosted by Titans, Raiders, and Washington legend Will Compton, along with Titans legend and I believe Michigan Wolverine Taylor Lewan. They reported this morning that George Kittle agreed to a 4-year, $76.4 million deal with $40 million guaranteed. Locks in Kittle likely for the rest of his career with the 49ers, I would imagine anyway. Barring a disaster, he gets on the 10-year wall. And honestly, man, I didn't think that he would, or I shouldn't necessarily say that we'd really get to this point where the 49ers and Kittle would be agreeing to a third contract, because it looked for a while there like in 2021 and in the first part of 2022 like he was on kind of the downside of his career. But he's had this bounce back where he looks like prime George Kittle, and he's a first-team All-Pro and the best tight end in the league again. So I have a hard time finding any gripes with this extension.
No, I agree with you, and I think ultimately it's a really good sign for where the 49ers are at from an offseason perspective. What was the thing we said as soon as the season ended? The Niners need to get off this bullshit of letting these contract disputes spew into the summer and training camp.
1,000%.
They need to get all of it handled. They need to have a normal offseason. They need to just bite the bullet, sign these deals, maybe give a little bit more money than you're comfortable doing, but just get the deal done so you have all of your best players happy in the building. It doesn't really matter how much George Kittle participates in the spring program, but at least, he's been in the building. He's been there working out with his teammates. Like, that stuff does matter to a certain extent. And if your argument would be it doesn't matter, well, I would just point to last season, right?
Mm-hmm.
And with all of the guys and even the history of guys dealing with contract disputes, them not getting done till August or even worse in September, and then not having great seasons, right? Like, I think there's a pretty strong correlation to, Brandon Ayuk obviously got hurt, but even before he got hurt last year, he wasn't off to a great start to his season. Deebo Samuel, the year he signed his contract in 2022, didn't have a great season. After that negotiation was drawn out. Same with Nick Bosa when he got his contract. So for George Kittle to get his contract before it's even May, I think that's a really positive development. And yeah, Kittle deserves it. Like, the Niners have been, made it pretty clear on what their priorities are in terms of who they're paying this offseason in particular. Mm-hmm. It's not going to be aging players who don't take care of their bodies or who have enigmatic personalities or who may or may not be reliable, right? Like, mm-hmm. George Kittle, he's dealt with injury issues, but even with all of his injury issues, he's still been one of the most reliable players on the roster. And I think that's what the 49ers are rewarding. So, yeah, I think it's good for everyone involved. It's obviously good for Kittle from a financial perspective. It's good for the team because they lock up really a key piece to their team, a key, culture setter in the locker room, somebody who has the offseason work ethic that you want. That's like pretty ideal to, mm-hmm. Maybe be a tone setter for everybody else. So there's no downside for me in this. And hopefully the next step for the Niners is signing Brock Purdy to his new contract. So that can at least be done, in the coming weeks before OTAs in June. So you at least can hit the ground running a little bit when you get to training camp instead of the constant swirl of drama that's been the 49ers contract talks with their key players.
It feels to me like the Kittle contract getting done is a sign that if things aren't close to done with Brock Purdy, they're trending heavily that direction. Where the 49ers are doing this deal now because they have a general ballpark idea or a firm enough grasp on what the structure of that deal is going to look like within kind of, some margin of error where they feel good about, okay, we'll get Kittle on this extension. And again, this is speculation, but it wouldn't shock me at all if Brock Purdy conceded or Brock Purdy's camp conceded some in some way and saying, okay, well, just make sure that you're paying dudes to stay around. Like,
Yeah.
I'll concede it. Like, I'm just going to pick numbers here. Let's say Brock wanted 58 and the 49ers are like, how about 50? And he goes, okay, I'll come down to 50 as long as, you have to pay the dudes, or like there has to be the give and take there.
Yeah.
Like that
Yeah.
wouldn't surprise me if that's something that's happened along the lines here where the Niners are like, okay, fine, hey, here's this extension for Kittle.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think there's an element to, and our buddy Nick Wagner pointed this out. Like, this was probably a little bit easier of a contract to get done, akin to, just giving Christian McCaffrey a raise last summer and guaranteeing him
Right.
some more money. Obviously, Brock Purdy's contract is going to be a lot bigger, a lot more complicated, a lot more moving parts, a lot more levers. And I would guess that from a front office perspective, the Niners are like, all right, we had a negotiating window in February. Then free agency happened. We gotta deal with free agency. Then all in on the draft. Now that the draft is over, they can say, okay, now we can talk contracts with our veterans, right? So
Mm-hmm.
to me, I think the next logical step is, all right, we got Kittle done. That's a relatively easy contract. Now we can really dig in and get this Brock Purdy deal done. Like, that to me
Mm-hmm.
would be a proper order of operations. So yeah, like, this is a good sign. Like, this is a sign that the organization, like, I'm certain the organization is worn out from these off seasons that feel a lot more tumultuous than they should be. Right,
That's
just
it,
with
dude.
dealing
Yeah.
with Debo Samuel and Brandon Ayuk and Nick Bosa contracts, and Fred Warner and George Kittle to a certain extent when their previous deals were done. Like, it's been difficult to get all of these deals done and everything fit. And I think they're just kind of like, all right, one of the reasons why we want to get like release some of these veterans and get rid of some of these bigger contracts is just like, let's make everyone's lives a little bit easier. Let's like take a little bit,
Mm-hmm.
like release the pressure valve a little bit from a salary cap perspective. So at
Yeah.
least, like, all right, if we need to negotiate and get this deal done maybe a little bit sooner, then we can do that, because the offseason being as draining as it's been, as it's felt like from the outside with these contracts, like, it feels like they're
Mm-hmm.
in a place now where, okay, if we can alleviate that and we can actually like go into training camp in a good place.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's the more than Kittle being around and more than what it means for Brock Purdy's contract or whatever. This reeked of the kind of thing that was going to go into August. And not
Yeah.
having that is just I hate the term. I don't hate the term unserious. I don't want to use the term unserious, but it feels unserious when every other team is getting these deals done and the 49ers are like, no, but we're so smart that we're going to do. And then they negotiate and the deal takes forever and they wind up paying them what they were going to pay him the entire goddamn time.
Right.
Like, so if you had any inkling that you were going to keep George Kittle around, which the fact that he was still on the roster to me meant that he was part of their core moving into the next 3 or 4 years. Like, yeah, get this deal done and get it off the books, or I guess get it on the books, get it off your to-do list, so you can
Cross it off.
focus on actually putting together a good football team.
Check that box.
Check that box. Good day for it.
Um, I think, yeah, and the other component of it too, obviously, George Kittle was set to have a $22 million cap hit. So it was presumably one of those scenarios where you could both extend him, give him more money, while also lowering his cap hits. His $22 million for George Kittle is a pretty substantial cap hit.
Yeah.
And it's probably one of those deals. Sounds like 40 guaranteed. So I'm guessing it's basically like 2.5 years of guarantees, more or less.
Mm-hmm.
There's probably a trigger next spring that triggers for 2027.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, like, I think, knowing the way the 49ers do contracts, it's probably one of those that gives Kittle some cash in his pocket for now, lowers his cap hit, and is probably, they could probably get out of it within, by 2027. That wouldn't be surprising to me. Again, we don't know the structure yet. That's just me speculating based on their history with these contracts. But yeah, it's a win-win. You keep Kittle around, and you also shrink his cap number, and that's really what I think fans should care about.
Yeah, that's it. He's a good player. They're in the business right now of keeping good players, and I think that's where this is evidence that they're not just dumping anybody who's old and rebuilding. If this was a roster that was rebuilding, they would not have done this. But if you were an aging player who was costing a lot of money, who was not as productive, they weren't going to keep you around. But George Kittle is the most productive tight end, or one of the most productive tight ends in the sport. So yeah, you're going to keep that guy around. It's exactly what Kyle Shanahan and John Lynch have been saying. And they've now just executed one of the contracts for a player they want to keep around.
I would say there's a caveat to that, though, because
go on.
Trent Williams is aging, makes a ton of money, had availability issues last year. Same with Christian McCaffrey, right? The difference is with George Kittle, Christian McCaffrey, and Trent Williams from, say, like Deebo Samuel.
Mm-hmm.
Those dudes, unquestionably, like the top 2 or 3 guys at their positions, each one of them. Like elite blue chip players. And that's not to say Deebo Samuel never was that, because he was an all-pro. But where Deebo Samuel was in the pecking order of NFL receivers after last season, I don't know, hell of a lot lower, right? Not a top 5 wideout. So not worth paying, in the top 5, top 10 of receivers. Like, so that I think is the clear delineation. It's like, all right, they will pay aging vets who have availability issues, but they're going to make sure that those guys are like the 2 or 3 best guys at their position in the entire NFL.
Right.
Whereas guys like Deebo Samuel, Javon Hargrave, certainly Malik Collins, right? Leonard Floyd, all of which seem pretty replaceable with the draft picks that the 49ers just selected.
Right. Yep. So you're saying Jordan Watkins is the next Deebo Samuel?
I'll find out on next week's pod.